Welcome and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The first issue is a work session item, the offer of dedication of land from Columbia Bank. Rodney?
Good afternoon. This is just basically a housekeeping item. Back in 2001, we widened the alley around District Court. Project went through just fine. We worked with numerous property owners to obtain land in the adjacent area. We obtained land from Hagerstown Trust, which is now Columbia Bank. There was agreement signed, but no deed was ever recorded in the courthouse conveying the southern sliver of land from what was then Hagerstown Trust to the city of Hagerstown. So we had the opportunity to correct that because some of that land is changing hands now and it came to the surface. So we're asking that you approve to allow us to sign a deed to have this recorded, and the land where the street actually is right now would actually be the city of Hagerstown.
Everybody okay with that? Cool.
Yep.
All right, so, yes, now we need a motion to go into the third special session.
So moved.
Get a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. First is a resolution for the approval of a contract of the two, well, wait a minute. What happened? I missed it.
Mr. Mayor, right here.
Yeah, I know. I'm just reading it. Approval of resolution authorizing the execution of a deed of conveyance from Columbia Bank.
Mayor, I hereby move for approval of a resolution authorizing the execution of a deed with Columbia Bank, former Hagerstown Trust Company, to accept the offer of conveyance of right-of-way and utility easements as shown in drawing number 83-702-13.
Get a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next is the approval of the contract for the 2017-18-19 Western Maryland Blues Festival Sound Technician.
Mayor, I move for Mayor Council to approve the bid of MHA Audio Inc. to provide sound and technical assistance for the 2017-18 and 2019 Western Maryland Blues Festival, costing $50,135 per year. The MHA Audio Inc. proposal most clearly conforms to the original festival intent and bid spec set out, and request for proposals P1616.17.
Second?
Second.
Discussion?
Did we ever get, last week we talked about what the previous contract figure was?
Yeah.
Okay, in the memo?
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1. All right, we'll move out of special session, back into the work session. And the first item is the McCleary Hill Nolan Master Plan in Hagerstown Housing Authority.
We've got a few props for you. We've got boards and PowerPoint presentation. And handouts. copy of the master plan for Cleary Hill being distributed. So this presentation is really just for informational purposes. We just want to share the Housing Authority's plan for redevelopment of Nolan Village. We're not requesting any action today. My name is Glenn Worgan. I am a principal with Delaware Valley Development Company. My company was selected by the Housing Authority a couple of years ago to be its developer partner for the redevelopment of Nolan Village. Nolan Village is the next of the Housing Authority's projects to be redeveloped. It's already completed Gateway Crossing and the Brooks Building, which both have been, I think, tremendous successes. Nolan Village is in need of redevelopment, and it is the subject of this presentation. Just for your information, I guess, I recognize some of you. I was the project manager of the Gateway Crossing project going back 10, 12 years ago, so I recognize the senator and some of the council folks here. It's good to be back. And so just to give you a little context, I guess, about Nolan Village, and you can refer to some of the boards in the back. You're probably familiar with the location of Nolan Village. It's in the southwest corner, and I'll refer you to this plan there. There's Nolan Village on that one board. And it was built in 1972, kind of conventional barrack-style public housing. It's not very attractive. It was done through a turnkey operation, which basically means design was taken off the shelf and put on the site. So there's really no good urban design. The architecture of the public housing, thank you, David. By the way, this is David Kump, I'm sorry. David's with the Housing Authority. We also have some other Housing Authority members here, Joanne Ballingy, Chris Howlett, and Sean Griffiths. Sorry about that. So Nolan Village, just has a very poor urban design. The public housing stands in stark contrast to the surrounding community. Its architecture and its systems are obsolete. It's really not an inadequate community for modern families. It's very inefficient and costly to maintain. Just to give you an example, there's no air conditioning, no handicap accessibility. Most of the units have bathrooms only on the second floor. There's no one-bedroom units. There's inadequate storage. And there's just a very high concentration of large family households at the site. Nolan Village is in dire need of rehabilitation. There's extensive rehab work that's needed annually. Major capital improvements are required. The Housing Authority has determined through a series of studies conducted by third parties that major renovation work is required. The numbers that have been estimated include $7.5 million of rehab required in the next 10 years and over $12 million over the next 20 years. The Housing Authority has had only $1.1 million over the past 7 years to address its problems at Nolan Village, so it's severely underfunded. Basically, they are just keeping up with deferred maintenance with the monies that they have right now. Looking forward, they have about $3.1 million to put towards these major renovations over the next 20 years. So there's a severe shortage of cash. So next, David, just a couple of images of Nolan Village just to give you an idea of what it looks like. As I said, conventional public housing. In order to redevelop Nolan Village, the Housing Authority has to look to non-federal sources of funding. And almost all public housing authorities nationwide are in the same predicament. Just short of federal funds. So we have to look to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. It becomes just the obvious place because that is the administrator of the resources that are geared towards housing these days. As I mentioned, we've been engaged in the planning process. We've met with the city staff, with the Housing Authority Board, outside consultants, planner, architect, developer, to arrive at the current plan, which effectively splits the current Nolan Village development into two. 140 of the existing 250 units are going to be transferred to a new site in the city, which you can see on the plan up on State Route 144. So that's the general concept. We arrived at this location because the site itself, Nolan Village that is, has a high concentration of public housing. I think the city sort of encouraged, or city staffers encouraged us to reduce the density of the low-income residents in that location. In addition, the state funding programs have a preference for development of properties that are located in what they call areas of opportunity. And this new site is in an area of opportunity. So we're looking at a four-phased demolition and redevelopment of the existing Nolan Village. As I said, moving 140 units, affordable units, to the new site. 2 phases will be constructed at the new site, 68 in the first phase, 87 in the second phase. We're looking at doing a series of market rate rental units and home ownership units on the new site and the old Nolan Village. So we're looking to do a mix of incomes in both locations. The home ownership units will be funded through private dollars and donations from both my company and the Housing Authority. We're going to build a new community center, and our goal is really to create a community that has a similar quality as Gateway Crossing. We're looking at investing over $70 million overall, collectively between the two development sites. Next. So this slide here is the master plan, if you will, site plan, which shows highlighted Phase 1, which is shaded, and then the lighter area is Phase 2. The area out on the state highway there is generally the home ownership area and in the cul-de-sac. We're looking at a community center, 2 new parks. We're going to have alleys similar to the city of Hagerstown. We're looking at building new streets, alleys, infrastructure, water, sewer, all of which will be dedicated to the city. So we think this plan is consistent with the goals of the city's comprehensive plan. You can hit the next one, David. So I just have a couple of slides here that show the actual language from the comprehensive plan. Strategic investment, improve low-income neighborhoods, other areas exhibiting conditions of slum and blight. Main goals of the 5-year plan are to improve the living conditions of all residents of the city, create a suitable and sustainable living environment, address the housing and community development needs of the city residents. Issues identified, specific issues identified in the plan, need for additional units that are accessible to persons with physical disabilities. As I mentioned before, there's no accessible units at Nolan Village, and we're looking at 10% of our units at McCleary Hill will be accessible. All units, by the way, will be visitable, people with wheelchairs. There's a continued need for affordable and accessible housing in the city. There's an overriding objective and strategies to assist low and moderate income residents. And the city is to explore possibility of partnering with the Hagerstown Housing Authority. So all of those are very consistent with what we're presenting today. I want to mention that we're not adding any low-income units to the city's housing stock. Next. Benefits to the city. So number one would be creation of jobs. It's hard to put a number on the creation of jobs, but many studies kind of suggest that there will be a substantial job creation, construction and permanent jobs through this development. As I mentioned, $70 million, in excess of $70 million will be spent. We've committed, my company's committed to spend 70% of all contracts on local contractors. So monies that's going to be spent here locally will be kept here in Hagerstown. So we're looking at new water services, sewer service, gas, electrical. Fees will be paid to the city for any new units. We're going to be dedicating new streets and infrastructure. We're going to be donating our fees, as I mentioned before. Total fee donation will be in excess of $1 million between the Housing Authority and my company. Removal of blight, beautification, deconcentration of poverty, addition of home ownership and market rate units. And lastly, there should be a reduction in crime. I would just like to point out, I made a mistake. It's not the comprehensive plan, it's a consolidated plan. Just want to be clear about that. I want to mislead it. So that's generally the overview. Next is an image of of a typical building that we're proposing. There's also some images on the boards. But again, this is trying to model Gateway Crossing here with this development. It's a very high-quality design. It does not look like public housing. In fact, this is going to be built higher than a builder's grade standard for market rate housing. So it's really a high-quality design, high-quality construction. And what happens if we do nothing? Well, Nolan Village will continue to deteriorate, be a financial drain on the Housing Authority, and affect its ability to manage its other properties. There's potential that the existing community will decline even further. There's potential for increased social and economic problems. Nolan Village will be home of choice for the lowest income residents of Hagerstown. Working families will not choose to live there. So that's pretty much it. We're happy to take some questions from you. Hopefully you think it's a worthy venture.
Anybody?
Did a couple of things, fortunately. I get to live about 2 blocks from Nolan Village, the current Nolan Village. I walk through there probably 2 to 3 nights a week. The other night on my way in, I contacted the police for shots fired on one of the units in Block 1. And I have a family member that lives in one of the other units that's managed by the Housing Authority in another location that has now been removed from their unit 4 times for bedbug infestation from adjoining units. And when I hear things like, you know, the expectation here is a reduction in crime, sort of like an afterthought, that you know, Nolan Village will continue to deteriorate as if to suggest that it is government's decision that occurs, or that you know, that this place is being made the place where individuals that do not work determined to live. I have to wonder, being familiar now and being able to see some of the police calls for services figure over time for a place like Gateway, that hasn't changed, by the way, since its completion. And I grew up on Concord Street, so I'm intimately familiar with the Gateway crossing area. I lived a half a block from it for about 10 years of my life. I have to wonder what benefit this creates having that level of familiarity with the area and location that this is being proposed. It is further, on the fringes of the city. I get the luxury of walking down Linwood twice a week and seeing 15 or 20 shopping carts from the local food line, which is now Shop and Save, being discarded on the side of the street along with the trash and debris. And I look at these things and I wonder to myself, what community would I wish that upon? Because if I have to use those as the measures of experience in being considered for approving a plan to have more of it, then my response would be, we're not adequately managing what we have that would make me want to support any effort of creating more of it.
It's my understanding that it's not creating more of it, though. Isn't it the same amount of units, just in two separate locations?
That's correct.
But it's further, though, supporting the existing issues and problems that we're faced with. I mean, I think ultimately, a continued focus on things to reduce the need for social services and these type of projects should be more at the forefront than expanding them. At the end of the day, Councilman Alshire just said about, moving this from basically one spot to another. I'd be curious to see what the residents in this area of the community have to think about such planned development. I have a hard time supporting anything in that plan.
We also live in an area that's median income is like $26,000. We have a severe
understand
need
that.
for decent, affordable housing.
But I don't accept that to be the future standard.
Well, I hope not. I think that's what we're all here. We're all elected officials to try to get higher paying jobs and improve everyone's quality of living. And right now, Nolan is not acceptable. I don't care how low income you are
Right.
to be living
No one
in.
closed down and there wasn't, I
I-
don't know.
Don?
Well, let me start here. There are how many units altogether? Did you say 250?
250 existing units in Nolan Village.
Okay. Now, 140 of them will move to to the other part, the new project.
Correct.
How are they going to be paid for? This is,
The relocation of the residents being,
I'm talking about building the new complex, as well as, I assume, rebuilding the old complex off of Nolan Drive. How will that be paid for?
the sources of funds that we're proposing to use.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we're going to be looking to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development through two primary funding sources. It's the housing tax credit, which is a federal tax credit administered by every state. So the Maryland Department of Housing administers the tax credit. In addition, they have a program called the Renault Housing Renault Housing Fund Program. So that's a soft funding program that they allocate to projects like this.
So it's a combination of state and federal money.
Correct,
Okay.
yes. There's also a federal operating subsidy that will remain with the Housing Authority's units. So it's actually going to be converted from, it's sort of a technical term, but it's converting from public housing to what they now call RAD, which is called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. So it's still operating subsidy, it still sort of functions the same way as public housing, but gives the Housing Authority the ability to increase the subsidies every year to better maintain the property.
How long is it going to, in terms of years, complete the entire program?
Well, we'd like to do one phase per year. That's our goal. So we'd like to do this in 4 years, so, once we start construction. So it may take 5 to 6 years altogether.
Okay. But the ultimate effect is, I guess, there are two ultimate effects. One is it will lower poverty concentration at Nolan Village, right?
Correct.
As well as provide decent standard of housing there.
Yes.
And ultimately, if nothing is done, if this isn't built, the cost of maintaining Nolan Village is going to become prohibitive. Is that an accurate
That is
statement?
very accurate, yes.
Now, should that happen, if the cost becomes prohibitive, will there be funds somehow made available to us, to somebody, to repair that damage? I mean, I saw some pretty startling numbers here. It's going to cost a lot more, apparently, to refurbish that than we have or anticipate coming in over the years. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, and I mean, somebody from the Housing Authority might want to chime in, but today there are no funding programs for the Housing Authority to use to, no capital funding program available to renovate this community.
Okay, and this does not, this proposed project, either end of it does not include additional individuals, low-income individuals. It's keeps it at 250.
Correct.
Essentially.
Yes.
It doesn't include some private pay housing in the new development of, what, 15 units, if I remember correctly?
Rental units plus home ownership, yes.
That's
We
what I'm
don't,
talking about.
yes, and we don't,
homeownership.
well, there's 15 market rate rental units, and on the new site, there'll be some on the old site, and there'll be some home ownership units on both sites as well. We don't know the exact number of home ownership units yet, just because it really depends on how much, where the numbers really flesh out. We don't know that yet.
Okay, as a practical matter, it doesn't matter how we feel about it or how we vote, it's going to be done, right?
Well, the site has the zoning, the proper zoning for this development to move forward. The funding is coming through the Maryland Department of Housing, private sources and equity. So, like I said,
From us what you needed last time, right? A letter of support.
we don't need a letter of support.
So you don't need anything.
We don't need financial contribution. Like I said, this is kind of informational,
Oh, good.
for
Well,
informational purposes. We'd like to have your support, and we'd like to have your cooperation, obviously.
Well, I happen to think that it is a good project, and I do support it. I think it's really good to deconcentrate the poverty and to introduce home ownership into the whole system. I like those things a lot.
And Mayor, I see this as simple, and I say simple, not that the question of whether you agree or disagree is simple, but it seems like we're reliving the very same thing we went through before with Gateway Crossing. Except I think you needed our letter of support for that one.
We did,
Okay.
yes.
So, and I know there were issues then. I supported the Gateway Crossing project, and I support this project too. Now, it seems to me that Kristen has brought forth, which is concerning, and I think the Housing Authority needs to deal with this issue. And I don't know if it's accurate or not, but I suspect that it is from Kristen's statements. And that is that we have not seen a decline in police calls or services to Gateway Crossings over what was there before. Is that correct, Kristen?
Well, I think it's a myriad of those issues.
Well, I mean, but that's one issue.
I think that's one item.
Right.
I think
So-
we haven't seen a decline in level of service response in general.
Right, so that certainly is an issue, and those who are putting brick and mortar down aren't going to be controlling that issue. Those who decide who the tenants are going to be and what will be allowed and not allowed will be making those decisions. But I see a couple duties here. One, I see a duty to the people who live in the vicinity of Nolan Village. It is becoming, I thought Ross Street was a slum, quite candidly, that has been replaced by Gateway Crossing. It absolutely, I've been in those places, and I wouldn't want to tell people that they have to live in those situations. And people being poor and downtrodden doesn't mean that they should be forced to live in the worst housing there is because people don't want to do something about it. So I support it from that perspective. I support it from the perspective of people that live around Nolan, that will be better off with it being phased down and improved. And I support it from the position that if it doesn't do anything else to our community except change the physical appearance of it, that's better than not. Exactly. I wouldn't want to see private housing that way. Obviously, you're not even asking us for a letter of support, let alone money, so it's not a matter of us stopping this or starting it. I agree with Paul. I think there are going to be some people upset out off 144, and housing authorities want to have a job to make sure they're comfortable with things. And I think the biggest thing is not poverty. I think, and I don't believe poverty and crime have to go together. But I think that's the biggest issue is making sure tenants are handled appropriately. And having said that, I do support this project. I think it will be positive for the citizens all around. I think Gateway, that's where I come from. I think Gateway was a success. I know there are others here that disagree with me, and I appreciate that.
Could I just respond to a couple of
Oh,
comments
yeah, be my guest, yeah.
that were made? I'd like to maybe take a look at the statistics
Yeah, we have a question written.
of Gateway Crossing and maybe bring them back so we can
Love to.
take a hard look at the crime statistics. Because the Housing Authority believes that they've dropped dramatically. Calls have dropped from Westview Homes to Gateway Crossing. I think maybe by 2/3, is that what we think? So maybe we can prepare something and submit it to the
I think we should look at all
city.
those statistics. I'd love to see the statistics on the bed bug issue of the Housing Authority properties.
All right, we'll include that in the report as well. As for the residents out on 144, we will, in time,
Yeah, some community
Make-
meetings already.
we will outreach to those residents. And by the way, those are largely county residents, they're not city residents. The city boundaries is very odd out there. It's very, very irregular shape. and
City
it's-
boundaries are very odd everywhere.
Yeah, so almost all the residents in that area are county residents, not city residents. But again, we will
Make sure you tell them
we
to go
will
to the county
we will
commission.
reach out to them.
At the end of the process, you currently have 250 units at Nolan. That's what you currently have there, right? At the end of the process, this new location will have 140 of those units.
Correct.
Once that is constructed, you will reconstruct Nolan, reducing it from 250 to 110.
That's right. Affordable units. We'd also like to introduce homeownership and market rate rental units to that location as well.
Reducing them, and so the makeup of the 250 units will not reduce significantly the existing number of bedroom units that these 250 new units make up. Right now, let's say there's 250 units, and let's say that out of the 250, let's say that, 100 of them are 3-bedroom and 150 of them are 2-bedroom. I'm just gonna,
We are reducing the bedrooms because several of the families at Nolan Village are what we call overhoused. So they have units that are too large. So we're going to be building the appropriate size units for the existing family, so.
So how many one-bedroom units are you introducing to the new 250-unit makeup?
I think there's a table on the cover of that report there. And it doesn't say the one-bedroom units, the breakdown of the one-bedroom units.
So I want folks to understand very clearly the different dynamics that exist in a neighborhood when you increase the number of units ratio to single-bedroom units versus what exists there now, which is, as you point out, your traditional family-size bedroom unit neighborhood,
So we're gonna have 51 bedroom units
which will be located,
between the two development sites. So phase 1 and 2 at the McCleary Hill site, there'll be 26 and 24 one-bedroom units at Nolan Village. So it's a pretty significant increase in one-bedroom units. And those will be occupied by seniors and couples and single people.
So if you don't need any support per se from the city, whether it's financially or a letter of support, and it sounds like unfortunately for us at this table, this project will move forward regardless. Who has that authority? Because I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about, as Councilman Munson pointed out, almost doubling, well, I guess the bedroom percent, but you're creating now 2 developments. And it's just gonna continue to enable the socioeconomic issues that our community is facing. And if there's nothing we can do here at this table, then I'd like to find out what table we gotta talk to.
Well, I would put forth that it's gonna help solve social and economic issues by decreasing the poverty, by increasing the quality of the housing, the quality of the neighborhood, beautifying the existing community, enabling children to go to a better school, which is one of the reasons why the state gives a preference to this location.
I
is that
understand
there's
your
a better
vested
school in
interest
that
in building
area,
a home,
so it's considered an area of opportunity by definition. And so I think the families would be better served in this new location.
These particular families, I beg to differ, the families in the surrounding community, though.
Is phase 1 currently, the location of phase 1 currently within the city limits?
Yes, it is.
We go the whole way to Hopewell Road.
yeah, we annexed, this is one of the first properties, I believe, under the annexation policy that got annexed in, where we had
Tractor
some.
supply area.
Where we had, no, this is north of that. This was slated at one time for a residential neighborhood, comparable to the existing residential neighborhood on the north side of
Of 144.
144.
Gotcha. All right.
But now I assume that this will, instead of that, be some form of tax exempt or pilot driven tax development.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, because I think the Housing Authority's current portfolio is under a pilot. So, yes, but that may be changing. I'm not sure if that's changing or not. But the property will pay tax. The affordable units will pay tax. It'll be at a reduced level, but it will pay tax. The market rate units and the home ownership will pay full freight property tax.
Any more questions for these guys?
And just to clarify, our executive director wanted to say that we cannot reduce the amount of public housing that we have. We must maintain what it is that we have. So to say, let's get rid of half of our public housing would not would not work for us. We would have dilapidated properties with boards over it.
Okay. Thank you,
Mayor,
Jim.
before they leave, could I make a comment?
Sure.
Joanne Ballingy is the executive director, of course, over at Hagerstown Housing Authority. At the end of the month, Joanne is retiring. And I would like to wish her well, and I'm sure I'm talking on behalf of the entire mayor and city council. Joanne has been the executive director for 2 years now. She replaced Ted Schenkel, who I think was there forever. And Joanne has done a really excellent job. She's been a good leader. She's been a strong leader. And she's helped make things happen for the city of Hagerstown. When it came to the cultural trail, she could have made our life impossible, but she chose not to. And that includes the board of Hagerstown Housing Authority. She's had to deal with lots of problems, including bed bugs, which we know is a real issue in the city of Hagerstown. And she is going away with a great reputation. And I just want to say, beyond the fact that she has cooperated a lot with the city of Hagerstown to make it a better place, she's also contributed in other ways as well. She is, if I recall correctly, part of Main Street, and she has worked hard to make sure that the Hagerstown Housing Authority and the city of Hagerstown are cooperating as full-time practically and as much as possible, and that all of us are trying to be better places. So Joanne, I just want to thank you for your service and wish you well in retirement on behalf of the mayor and city council. And we're going to miss you, Joanne. And I know that that your successor is going to be a good person and going to hopefully have the same sort of policies toward the city of Hagerstown, which you've done well, and thank you.
This is my successor, by the way. He's also with Main Street with me, so, and I plan to continue that even after I retire. It's near and dear to my heart to work with the city, so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Michelle, you're up. You got time to make up. Come on. 2017 bond project listing of potential counties.
Michelle, your time's up, sorry.
I see this. Actually, I was just going to say, being aware and cognizant of how many other items we have to cover on the agenda, I'm just back this evening, want to finish looking at the project listing we started to look at last week. And then inclusion in this packet, because I know that we have several new people, and also our city administrator, Valerie Means, this would actually be her first full-fledged bond issue. So I included a calendar and it's an expedited process, just to give everybody an idea of if we move very quickly, the duration of time it actually takes us to issue one of these bonds. So first up, the project listing looks identical to the information I included last week in our packet, and we covered the very first top half, which was the general fund. The bottom half of the projects are in our enterprise funds, and just as a reminder, any debt that we would issue, the repayment is made out of those funds, and on the enterprise side, that would be from the charges from services that they do and they provide, and those calculations are included in their budget. So on the water fund, for the most part, all of these items are continuation of programs that have already been in place. The largest one on here is Project 709, which is rehab main replacement. And again, $550,000 was in the 17 budget, and $550,000 is the amount that that right now we'd still be looking at to do from a bond request. Some of these projects are already funded partially from bond and then the remaining from their operations. This, when I have the amounts included here, it's only the amounts that they look to bond finance and not the total project value. And I'm gonna skip past water fund, go to wastewater. The biggest project there is for Center Grove facility improvements. We have a 10-year contract that we have in place with Center Grove, and they are the company that handles the treatment processing at our plant. And as part of that, when we brought that back a few years ago, we agreed to 5 continuous years of $1 million replacements. So this would be continuation of that $1 million a year replacement schedule. So it's included back on here. It's in red because it's taxable. The reason it's taxable is because the city of Hagerstown doesn't actually manage that project. Center Grove actually does. The very last one is Property Management Fund, and that fund oversees and holds properties where we're a landlord, we're renting out places. And this is EHC, and I apologize for the abbreviations, that is the Elizabeth Hager Center. It's right across the central lot from City Hall. And this is the replacement of the roof, and I believe we had just come back and asked this body a couple of weeks ago to actually do the full amount of that. So this was how we would pay and anticipated paying that. Just as a note,
Sorry. Was there a portion of that with that roof that got rolled over in that previous bond money that you were talking about a couple weeks ago? Or is that something
not for
different?
the,
That was a
not
different
for,
one.
not
Okay.
for the roof.
Thank you.
On the original bond a couple weeks ago, we had anticipated another building under property management, which is the Rosalind Building. We were looking at doing the windows. And so we deferred
Okay.
doing the windows and moved that monies elsewhere. The only other thing I want to notate is on the projects, if you look at the top under general fund, we had made several distinctions last week on a few of the projects. And based on feedback, I did adjust what would be included in the bond when we're ready to move forward. Public, so the very next documents at the top says publicly advisory consultants, and again, those are our financial consultants. They're the ones who actually help us go to market. We'll actually prepare the RFP and the bids. But this bond schedule, again, it's just a way to reflect and show how long a bond takes from beginning to end. If you look on this document at the top, first and foremost, it's several weeks of just coming here before council, reviewing the project listings. Once we would be ready to move forward and had direction to move forward to work with the financial group and with our bond counsel, we would come back and introduce a bond ordinance, and then the following week, hopefully adopt that ordinance. 31 days later, I'm going to jump us the whole way down to the week of March the 6th, we would come back and do a bond resolution. And again, these dates are not necessarily reflective of dates that we're bringing any action back, but just to give us an idea of how long and the duration it takes. And so if all of that was done from start to finish, if we started the week of January the 9th, on April 17th, we would anticipate the monies would be in our account. So you can see the process is long, a lot of the steps and the information in here. There's abbreviations for POS, and that is Preliminary Official Statement. And that is a document that my staff internally prepares probably 3/4 of that. The rest is our CAFR, and a little bit is prepared by our bond counsel. We could have several drafts of that back and forth between City of Hagerstown, bond counsel, and financial advisor. And once that's all done, it becomes an official statement, and that's what's released to the rating agencies. At the point the rating agencies review that, we either sit down and have a conference call, or rating agencies may come here to the City of Hagerstown to review and see a presentation from us, and/or the City of Hagerstown could be asked to go to New York to actually present to our rating agencies. And we have two, Standard & Poor's and Moody's are the two that we currently participate with. Yes,
Two quick questions.
sure.
Do you recall, in our last bond issue, how much the general fund portion of it was?
So in 2015, after we reprogrammed or before we reprogrammed? So our total 2015 bond issue was just shy of $10 million.
Okay. But
Not-
did that include the enterprising?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so it was probably somewhere around 5 million.
It was close.
Okay. Now, just to reiterate to those who are watching us on TV, the water fund, wastewater fund, property management fund, none of these bonds are paid for them out of the general fund, right?
From
All
taxpayer
these-
money. That's
All these
correct.
enterprising funds pay for their own bonds.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then what I would like to do is come back over the next couple of weeks, over the next 4, come back by the beginning of March and get permission to move forward and actually start this bond issuance. And again, when we bring that back, the project listing will look very similar to, you will no longer see a fiscal year 17 budget request, you will just see where it has the bond request with the listing of the projects. It'd be very abbreviated. The descriptions is not nearly as lengthy at that time.
So Michelle, instead of introducing next week, which we're obviously not doing, you're looking at a possible introduction at the beginning of March. So your drop dead date to have the money is still July 1,
It's
correct?
still July 1, yes. Otherwise, we have to find other funding sources for some of our projects we've already started.
Okay.
Any other
Okay.
questions for Michelle? Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Michelle.
Chief? Review of Pioneer Hook and Ladder Building, 21 to 23 West Franklin Street, and possible addition to the competitive negotiated sale program.
The chief was before you back in December about the fire department's decision to vacate the property, and we listed a couple of the rationale behind that in the memo, which is the 2016 Truck 1 being moved to Eastern Boulevard. The fire department working closely with Pioneer Hook and Ladder Company on the decision, some evaluation of the building with estimated priority repairs in excess of $125,000 and full renovation in excess of $350,000. Some other factors preventing the location from being the better site for fire rescue deployment. And the city has provided a commitment to Pioneer Hook and Ladder for a small amount of space dedicated for office and storage within the existing footprint of the Eastern Boulevard facility. So the question for discussion is the competitive negotiated sale process, and does the council wish to put this property, 2123 West Franklin Street, a part of that process, which would allow for an equal opportunity among developers in the community to put forward proposals to acquire the property. So a quick summary of the competitive negotiated sale process. It is the current process by which we facilitate the sale of city-owned properties with the goal of returning the properties back to the private sector, getting the properties back on the tax rolls, and looking for redevelopment and highest and best use. And the council determines what properties are made available through this process. The Department of Community and Economic Development coordinates the application process for which we receive proposals, and we have a review committee that takes a first look at those proposals. We bring them forward to the mayor and council, and the mayor and council ultimately decides on any properties that are transferred to the private sector using the process. There's additional background information in the packet about the competitive negotiated process, including our guidelines and our application form. There are currently 5 properties in this program, 4 that are actively being marketed. One, 4353 West Washington, that was recently put under contract and is pending finalization of a sale. So I open it up for a discussion and questions. And let me give you a few more facts. The building that we're talking about is a 2-story building. It's approximately 5,500 square feet. Has a current assessed value just under $300,000 at approximately $297,800. The building could be reused. It would contribute toward the redevelopment of that portion of Franklin Street if it was turned back to the private sector. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And it's 100 years old, right?
It's an old, unique building.
Any questions for,
All city properties subject to this process, I'm assuming, the
Cities,
competitive-
right, cities, properties that the city desires to vacate and no longer use and want to turn back.
This is the process, okay.
This is the process, and there's a list on about the second page in, which properties. We have the Alms House, the
Right,
Massey
absolutely.
Building, Nicodemus Building,
I guess I was
Roslyn
curious
Building.
whether, do we ever run across a situation where there's a city-owned property to go back and it does not go through this process, or this is the defined process?
I don't know how long this process has been in
Not long.
place, yeah, but it is the defined process now.
That's what we did before this was established.
What's the zoning currently?
Is CCMU, it's City Center Mixed Use, which allows for a wide range of uses,
I'd be
commercial,
concerned with
residential?
commercial, residential, right?
some of the zoning uses prior.
Just
Put it
not
for sale.
heavy industrial, light industrial is allowed in the CCMU assembly, but not any heavy industrial, but really a range of professional, office, residential, or commercial use.
I think it's important to note, we're the sellers.
Right.
So, just as in probably the last 2 that this has went through, we have, or went through this process, we've had fairly significant input on what the expectation of the, I'll call it the first end user of that property was going to do with it. Now, if it changes hands another 7 times down the road, but we at least have some,
That's what my concern is.
yeah, we have some input on that.
I'm all for
initial
returning it
sale.
back to the tax rules, obviously, but it's that long term effect, so. that's all.
Chief, I'm aware, and so is everybody sitting around this table, that some of the volunteers have expressed an interest in this building. How many volunteers are there at this time that would have something to do with this building?
So there's administrative board of directors that I believe comprises of 7 to 8 members. There are 4 that are certified and qualified to run calls.
So there's like 11 people, 10 or 11 people?
Some of those 4 to 7 are the same people.
Okay, so there's probably fewer than 10 people.
I think that's accurate.
Okay, now, as you know, I came around and looked at this building and went through this building from top to bottom. And I can't remember the answer to this question. Does the building require a new roof?
It does. There are water leaks. There is debate amongst people who evaluated that, how much of that is coming through or around the roof and gutters, and how much is coming through antiquated mortar. The building is solid brick, laid in a fashion where, and I honestly don't know technically why the mortar at the turn of the century has a tendency to seep water more than.
So you're getting
Because
leaks
100
through
years
the
old.
roof, leaks through the walls and every place else.
Yeah, the assessment was very thorough, and it included representatives from the Pioneer Volunteers.
Okay. So the cost to replace those things plus the inside repairs that I saw that were necessary, is in excess of $350,000.
It is.
Look, I really understand the emotional attachment for the people, the volunteers who have spent so much of their lives giving to this company and giving to this company and giving to this company. Is there one man who has been doing it at least 40 years?
Just under 40 years, yes.
However, I don't see any way that 7 to 10 people could ever afford to possibly repair this building in a way that it wouldn't continue to decline in downtown Hagerstown. So quite frankly, speaking as a city councilman, I would like to see it go to the city's competitive negotiated sale program. I think there's potential there for student housing, perhaps other commercial uses on the first floor. I think it will be a taxpaying entity one of these days with a little help from $350,000 and or more. And I personally feel that's the way we need to go.
More importantly, from my chair, I don't foresee or forecast a public safety need for that building. And it's really, as we've discussed here before, it was erected at a time when horses pulled fire trucks. There's not room in it for modern fire apparatus.
So we're okay with putting this on the bid process? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Conversion District Amendment, 901 Pope Avenue.
Just back before you on the conversion district amendment, just to follow up on that real quickly. We did not receive any public input since our public review meeting on December 20th. And concerning what was pointed out at the public hearing last month, staff revised the proposed ordinance on number 2, the resale and wholesale trade, to match what was in the application, just reconfiguring it so there's no strikeouts. So it says the same thing, no auto sales on the site.
A lot of sense, okay, good.
So we're okay with this then? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, Alex, stay put. Going to talk about A-2017-01, the annexation of 2009 Salem Avenue North LLC, Fulton's Salem Avenue annexation.
Yep, as the mayor pointed out, this annexation is on the north side of Salem Avenue. It's between Garland Grove Boulevard and that intersection and the intersection of Terps Boulevard, which takes you back into Collegiate Acres. This property is owned by the Fulton family. They have assembled some properties in this area and are anticipating future redevelopment of commercial activity, commercial development in the future. And they would like to annex into the city to basically get the properties ready for development, so they don't have to go through the annexation process at the same time there's a pending site plan or commercial development for the site. Currently, the property is zoned highway interchange in the county, and the building currently there's a commercial building on 4 acres. It also has 3 small houses and another commercial building that sets basically across the intersection, opposite the intersection of Garland Grove Boulevard. And as the redevelopment plans materialize, there would be an extension of utility lines. They also anticipate a plan that has a roadway connection not only to Terps Boulevard, but also to
potentially tap into Garland Grove Boulevard as well. And the total area of annexation is 5 3/4 acres. And if annexed, we would bring them in as commercial general. And the county highway interchange zoning and the city's commercial general zoning are generally consistent with one another. And so we wouldn't need any special approval from the zoning approval from the county commissioners, the express approval of zoning change. And in terms of the appropriateness of CG zoning, the planning commission, we'll have this on the planning commission's agenda next week, and they're meeting to just review and sign off on the appropriateness of the CG zoning for the annexation. Staff's recommending that the mayor and council introduce the annexation resolution and as submitted and adopt the annexation plan on January 31st. And per state law, we'd have to wait at least 30 days to have a public hearing. Your February work session is not within that 30 days, so the public hearing would be March 28th. And with that, I'll take any questions you all might have.
Any questions for Alex?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, last but not least, the Planning and Code Administration update.
We're here with Blaine Bowen, the chief code official for the city, and Paul Folk, the inspections manager for the city. We're here because early in the term of this administration, the question was raised whether everyone in the council understood the codes that were administered by the Planning and Code Administration Department, as well as any changes that had been made to those codes in the prior administration over the last 4 years. And so we're bringing that forward for you tonight. And then since we're here, we thought we'd also take the opportunity to outline for you the measures that we've been taking to improve communications and customer service tools based on interaction we've had with our customers, just to get you know what's in place already and what we're working on that'll be coming into play very early on. And I'll just give you a brief overview before Paul runs through the PowerPoint that he's prepared. The Planning and Code Administration Department administers or assists with the administration of 17 ordinances of the city code. The planning staff work with the land management code, which is zoning, subdivision land development, floodplain, and forest conservation. And then the code administration staff administer the building code, which is the big code we administer, as well as 15 other codes intended to promote public safety and protect the property values and quality of life in Hagerstown. Attached to the memo was sort of a 2-page chart that runs through all those codes with an explanation of the changes that were made in the prior administration. Paul will go through that in detail in the PowerPoint. And then under the initiatives to improve communication and customer service, as part of our work, we interact with a wide array of customers on a daily basis, folks that are either appealing to us to help with a nuisance in their neighborhood or to help get the attention of their landlord over a deficiency in their unit or property, or they're coming to us for help in understanding how the codes would affect their plans for their property, or they're subject to our inspections because they either have open permits or they have a licensed rental residential property or a licensed vacant structure, or they might be getting notices from us because there's some code violations of the property that have to be corrected. And so there's just a whole host of things that people interact with us about and types of folks that interact with us for various different reasons. And unfortunately, we meet resistance at times when the city's code requirements conflict with the goals and priorities of owners, managers, and occupants of property in Hagerstown. And so communicating effectively and providing helpful customer service tools are very important to what we do in order to be effective and to facilitate efforts to protect and enhance public safety, health, and welfare. There's always room for improvement, of course, and so we welcome input from our customers. We often get unsolicited input. And then if we know someone has an opinion about something, we invite them to meet with us so we can learn more and talk about whether there's ways to improve things or just to air things out, because sometimes things need to be aired out. We attached to the memo was also a report on things that we have implemented or are implementing based on this feedback we've gotten or based on our observations of the way things could be improved. And Paul's going to provide you some detail on the PowerPoint. So I guess before getting to the next steps part of the memo that was in the packet, maybe give Paul a chance to run through the PowerPoint that explains the code, what's changed, and then also the things that we're doing to work better with our customers.
All right, so I'll go over these codes. I'm not going, of course, to read the slides to everyone, but we'll go over some things. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask any of them. Like Kathy said, we have 17 different ordinances that the Planning and Code Administration Department enforces. One of the ones that she had mentioned was Chapter 64. Chapter 64 is a large code, I could say. It's very small in the city code book, but it's very large in a number of codes it involves because it's all of our building code, our plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and actually property maintenance as well. The questions were asked of what things were changed in the previous administration. In 2013, we amended the sprinkler requirement to be consistent with state codes that requires homes to be sprinklered. And then in 2015, we updated the code to follow the state requirements. The state of Maryland adopted a law that says as soon as the state of Maryland adopts the building, electrical, plumbing, mechanical code as the state's, local jurisdictions have 6 months to adopt it as theirs with local amendments, or we just have to adopt what the state had. So we did it with local amendments and adopted that in 2015.
And the local amendments don't provide the opportunity for the for the city to simply say, we're just fine with what we've got, we're just gonna amend it back to keeping it the way it is. I mean, it isn't, just wanna make sure when folks hear local amendments, you don't think, well, we can just make it say what we want.
Right, we have to adopt at least the state standard, and then we adopt things saying what our frost depth is, or what we want footing sizes, or electrical requirements, or what type of materials to use, that type of stuff. And we get input from our local contractors through licensee work groups to talk to them and get their input as well to come up with a joint effort to adopt these amendments. The other code that we have is the 64-8, which is the property maintenance code. And what I provided in these as well that I forgot to mention on the last one is that I provided when we could find when the first code was actually adopted as far as the code book goes itself. So the property maintenance code's been on the city code book since 1982. There, of course, have been changes of the code books and amendments, but the ones that we've made to our current code that was adopted was in 2012. We amended the smoke alarm requirements to be consistent with state law. And then in 2016, we amended the sections pertaining to trash regulations to be consistent with the changes that were made in Chapter 117. So we don't have one code saying one thing and another code saying another. We kept them consistent so we could address them both at the same time. Chapter 65 is what we call our habitual offender ordinance. This is one that if we have a particular property owner that is grossly violating our property maintenance codes and has been convicted in court 3 times or has paid the fines or municipal infraction citations 3 times, they are subject to the habitual offender charge. The only change we made to that ordinance in 2016 was to include all the codes administered by the Planning and Code Administration Department, rather than it solely being the property maintenance code, expanded it to involve all of our codes we enforce.
And I think it's important to note on this one that I believe after your first year of implementation out of thousands of units, that this is applicable to, what you had 45 units that ended up sort of triggering that, and of that 17 that you had to apply it to?
I'm sorry, I do not recall those statistics, but it was a very small number
It was like a
compared to
fraction
the,
of what?
yes.
Yeah.
Chapter 89 was a new ordinance that was adopted during, in the previous administration. It was for the donation bin ordinance. We first, in 2015, we banned them and then found out that that violated a federal court ruling. So we amended our code to have it where we license them. So currently we license 5 unattended donation bins in the city of Hagerstown. When we have ones come across that are legal to be put in place, we make contact with the property owners and make them aware of the requirement. Some choose to keep them and license them, but majority of them choose just to get them off their property. I'll be honest, majority of them don't know that they're set on their site. When they get an application from our office, they're like, oh, we want to get these gone, so they get them off the site.
And we had adopted the ban originally because we were having a lot of trouble with these bins not being managed very well by the bin owner and then attracting a lot of junk just stored all around them. So we said, well, let's just ban them. And then got some pushback, and so now we regulate how many there can be on a site, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I
And
watched
we-
it get cleaned up one time at the county market, and then as soon as they pulled away, I was like, really, you're dumping stuff? Couches, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh.
And it was amazing to find out that these shopping center owners, most of the time, didn't even know they were there.
Yeah, yeah.
They just got dropped off.
Chapter 95 is the excessive use of city services. This is an ordinance that Code Administration and also the Police Department work hand in hand in. We made an amendment in 2016 that we said that now if you are a property calls in an excessive use in the city of Hagerstown from the police department or code office, that only that particular property is subject to losing their rental facilities license, not all the ones that maybe that particular management company or owner controls. It's just for that specific property. So we amended that to practice along what we were doing in the field.
And that was in response to input we received from a realtor in town who was telling us investors were very worried, what if the city decides to start enforcing it so that you'd lose it for all your properties? And we said, well, we don't. They said, but what if you did? It's like, all right, well, we can make a minor code amendment to relieve you of that concern.
Chapter 117, the trash ordinance, we amended the code in 2013 to define what a dumpster is, clearly including like a roll-off trash container and prohibited roll-off
I remember that
dumpsters in a
one.
residential area.
We called it the Bob Rucci bill.
You should have.
In 2016, we amended the ordinance for trash storage and trash container requirements. This we were hearing from our neighborhood first groups and other citizens about concerns they had with the storage of trash cans in residential neighborhoods. So we amended that to match what was being requested by our citizens. So this amendment that was made here was also made in the property maintenance code, so they were consistent.
And within the next couple of months, we'll give you an update on how it's been for a year, educating the community and beginning the enforcement process.
Is that that incorporates the downtown? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have
Trash
to have a
and view.
discussion on that one.
Yeah. It's the trash and view, and then in the downtown, not having trash bags set out.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Chapter 140 is the land management code, what's more commonly referred to as, and planning staff and the planning commission review the code annually and propose amendments for mayor and council consideration, and it addresses the goals in the comprehensive plan and to facilitate also the protection of the quality of life in town. The amendments have public hearings and the mayor and council prior to adoption, so it's a very public process. The chapter 155 is the noise ordinance. In 2014, we repealed and replaced the ordinance, providing us a better tool to protect neighborhoods from excessive noise. We established a decibel standard rather than it having an opinion standard, I guess you say. There's a certain decibel standard. It's all across in different times of the day of when excessive noise can occur for in construction areas or in different zoning districts, things along those lines. Chapter 184 was the portable storage container ordinance. This was originally adopted in 2001 as an amendment to another ordinance that I guess we just felt that it fit into, but it was very hard to enforce that way, so we repealed the ordinance in 2013 and then just drafted one solely for the portable storage containers where they're not allowed in Hagerstown as far as for storage. We do allow them for permits for up to 6 months in certain areas. Most common is that Walmart and Home Depot typically do them at Christmas time for overstock. is where we usually have the majority of our storage containers. Chapter 185, we call it the Weeds, Trash, and Debris Ordinance, or also Nuisance Abatement Ordinance. But we haven't made any updates since 2010 on this one. Essentially, that ordinance is telling people you gotta mow your lawns. You gotta keep your grass below 10 inches in Hagerstown. If you don't do that, we will give you a notice and the city will mow it at the cost of the owner. The Chapter 187 is the Nuisance and Abandoned Property Ordinance. This was a new ordinance that we adopted in 2016. This was brought to us by our attorneys that wanted to give us a more legal ground to stand on for when property needs to be demolished, that we pursue all owners of the property and request them to come to circuit court so that everyone's aware of it, whether or not it's also the note holder or the property owner that's paying the mortgage. It brings everyone to court so they're aware. Chapter 197 is the Rental Facilities Ordinance. We made two changes in 2014. The first one was amending the Rental Facilities Ordinance to include the Chapter 95 requirements, saying if you have excessive use of city services at your property that you have potential of losing your rental facilities ordinance. And then later on in 2014, we amended the code to have annual exterior inspections on the property and increase the fee to $75 per unit. And then in 2016, when we were, like Kathy had mentioned, we were hearing feedback from a local real estate agent that this was hurting investments, if we said we enforced it the way the law was written in 2014, so we amended it to say that only your unit that was affected by excessive use is potential of losing a rental facilities ordinance. We also amended in 2016 also for what standards would accept for a Section 8 unit. We accept the Hagerstown Housing Authority inspections as our own, but we amended a little bit to say that, if we have previous outstanding cases on the property or it was condemned by city code, we want to make sure that we can close out the cases that are open in our books before we accept one of their standards. Chapter 200 is the Sanitation Ordinance. Technically, we are the ones to enforce this one. It addresses miscellaneous sanitation issues. Hasn't been updated since 1990.
It's funny that it says it was adopted in 1967 because it reads like it was adopted in 1907. Talks about, droppings from horses and stuff like that. It's very old sounding.
So we need to work on that one.
And that's a potential. Chapter 204 is the signs or billboard ordinance. We haven't done any changes to this since 1999. This is one that staff is currently working on with our attorney's office with First Amendment rights and some other rulings that have been coming out about signs. The Chapter 216, the signs, our streets and sidewalks ordinance. In 2015, we added a section for private use of public sidewalks and adopted a standard of such signs, and then in 2016 we amended that standard by hearing from the public and from the Main Street community.
It's for displaying merchandise on the downtown sidewalks.
And then, the chapter 232 and 233 is the vacant structures ordinance. It's two separate chapters. One addresses residential property and the other one addresses non-residential. But whenever we make an update, it's done to both of them at the same time. So in 2014, we repealed and replaced the ordinance, modifying what a vacant structure is, defining what blighted structure is in our community. We adjusted the fees. We added some SEPTED standards for crime prevention. And we also added some designated agents that we need to know who is the person to contact when there's a problem at this property. We also modified the inspection requirements. And then in 2016, we amended the code to define active work. We had some situations that where people were skirting around the ordinance with obtaining permits, so we defined that clearly. And then also we created two exemptions to the program and added an incentive for property owners to renovate the properties and get them back into a non-vacant state. And then those are all the ordinance that we do. I have some statistics for us here, and then we'll go into some of our items that we've done to improve communication. One of the things is I did just what last year was, just for some clarification purposes, that in 2016 we issued a little over 2,000 permits. That is the most that that the city of Hagerstown's issued since 2011. You can see that over the years we have been relatively right around the 2,000 mark, but this is the highest that we've had since 2011. And then also just want to make you aware that when anyone says it takes a while to get a trade permit, we're able through our Munis software system to track everything very closely. So if you're getting an electrical, a plumbing, or mechanical permit, on average, it takes you from the time you handed the application to the permit technician to when the permit's issued is 8 minutes, or 8 minutes and 6 seconds. So it's a pretty quick process to get in and out the door to get one of those types of trade permits. Plan reviews. Blaine is our main plan reviewer, and we have other staff that work with him as well on this. Last year we reviewed 531 building permit applications with that had plans submitted to them. So what is our average turnaround time? So essentially, when someone submits an application in our office, we turn that plan around to them in 16.92 days, so just under 17 days from the time the permit application was submitted to when the permit has been issued. A little over 12 of those days are spent in the plan review process with the different agencies that you see listed below that have to review them all. So all of those agencies may have to review a plan, and all of them review that within typically 12 days. And then the other part of those days, the other 4 days, is when the code office is awaiting something from the permit applicant. We don't know who the licensed contractor is to do the work, because we want to make sure it's a licensed professional that's going to do work inside the city. Also, we need to make sure that all the fees are paid, because we allow you to put a $100 deposit down, and then only all fees are due at the time of issuance. And then also, we want to make sure that the owner of the property is agreeing to this work going on. So we usually are waiting on those items, or is what holding up the issuance of a permit any quicker. And then, although it takes 12 days for us to review the process through all of our different agencies, Blaine and the other reviewers typically review the plans in less than 3 days when it gets in their hands. That it's turned around very quickly. And then just for a knowledge type of thing, that 90% of all the projects that we review are reviewed in less than 20 days. Because some are over the 20 days, as you typically do with any averages, you are going to have more than over the 16-day time period. So all of 90% of our plans are reviewed in less than 20 days, which is a national best practice benchmark that you want to achieve, that 90% of your plans are reviewed in less than 20 days, which we are. We're at 90.1 actually, but I didn't put the point in with that part.
Do we have any type of comparison to the county?
I don't know if they have the ability to track those types of things.
It might, we can ask. They have a software as well.
Mm-hmm. So the number of permanent inspections that we did, in 2016, we did 5,393 inspections were conducted. That means that anyone that's had an open permit with us can call for an inspection. And that 87% of the time when an inspector was called out for this request, it was passed during that time period. So although people do fail, I'm not going to deny that, as we're at 87%, there are items that always need to be corrected that might not meet code. 87% of the time, a permit inspection is passed during the first inspection. For rental inspections, in 2016 we did 720 rental interior inspections. 78% of those were approved for occupancy at their first inspection. During all those, we found a little under 2,000 deficiencies, and the top 3 deficiencies for interiors were smoke alarms, ground fault receptacles, and plumbing fixture conditions, which was kind of odd. When I ran that, we couldn't believe that was number 3, but when I ran the report, I guess we were having either leaking pipes or faucets leaking, or things are not functioning properly. Then for exterior inspections that we did, 52% of those had a pass for their initial inspection, meaning that everything was entirely correct on the exterior of the property. We found a number of deficiencies, and those top 3 ones were rubbish and garbage and trash on the property, chipping paint, and then also some high weeds on the property as well. And then one of the misconceptions a lot of times is that our office is always fining people. That is not the case. That in 2016, only 2.5% of all the notices that we issued actually received a municipal infraction citation. So it's a very small number. We do have to fine people because we have to hold them accountable if they're not meeting code, but it was a very small number that actually receives the fine in our office.
The 720 interior inspections, they basically come up mostly on change of tenants, correct?
Correct, yep.
Do we have, and forgive me if this knowledge should already be had, is there a process that we're going into all these apartments or buildings at some point?
No.
Or it's only when it changes over?
The inspections are done no frequent than 4 years from the last inspection and only at a vacancy. So say someone moves in today, a year later someone moves into a property, we do not do the inspection. We only do the inspection after the 4-year anniversary of that inspection.
So every 4-year cycle, we should have been in every building?
We only do it at a vacancy.
Some that we've never been in.
We
That's, I guess, what I was
yeah.
alluding to, I guess, of how many we have not been in and how many we've been in, and that.
Since the program's been in existence since 2002, we've probably only been in about 67% of the properties in Hagerstown. And that's probably a fairly fair estimate. That was on a calculation I did in 2011, is what I looked at that time.
Thank you.
But those inspections that you're talking about are primarily for lead, right?
Those are requested ones per the ordinance. So they had a turnover and it's been 4 years or they've never had an inspection at their unit before.
But the fact is, the state tells us what we can do with regard to lead, doesn't it?
The lead paint inspectors kind of handle all the lead paint types of things. That for lead paint, they're supposed to be inspected at every turnover, no matter if they live there for a month or 10 years.
So,
We don't inspect lead paint.
We collect the numbers for the state.
Correct. The state law requires that we collect their lead paint numbers to make sure that every property had their lead paint inspection. And we can't issue a license until they provide us all of the numbers for all the units in their building.
So let's say someone gets an inspection. Use any of the examples, whether it's really 2 different ones, a rental inspection, they fail, or on the technical side, a plumbing or electrical or building inspection, and they fail. Or they don't agree with the interpretation of the inspection, of the inspector's review. What is their recourse?
If a person doesn't agree with interpretation, they have the right to go to the Code Appeals Board, file an appeal, and request a hearing to
Who makes up
determine-
the Code Appeals Board?
That's appointed by the mayor and council. There was some recent appointments in the last administration for that board.
Do they have to
And what's the
pay-
cost for that
There
appeal?
you go.
$50.
Paul, if somebody comes to you and says, I need an inspection really fast, just as soon as possible, do you try to accommodate that?
We always do try to accommodate as our schedule sees fit. If it's a permanent inspection, they requested today, the inspection will be conducted tomorrow. The other inspections, if it's a rental request, we'll accommodate them as soon as possible to get inside that unit to do the inspection with them when they're available. Generally, we meet everyone's expectation for what is requested for the inspection time frame.
But if someone alerts us to an unsafe condition, we're out there pretty quick.
Right, there was an
That-
unsafe
that
condition,
day.
we're out there that day, we're addressing immediately.
Are you finished your presentation?
There's a couple other things here for some communication stuff that we want to talk about. In 2014, we did a survey. We emailed all of the licensed contractors. This was anyone that provided us an email address from 2010 to 2014. We sent them a survey asking for their feedback on the inspection staff. There was a 15-question survey. It talked about interaction with the staff, the permit plan review process, inspection schedules, and what items they would like to see implemented. Overall, we met the expectations of the licensed contractors 93% of the time.
To add to that, I had this interaction with a constituent, I guess it was late last year. This lady kept saying to me, I can't get my inspection done as fast as I need to. I have this emergency. I need to get my inspection done. So I started working with Kathy, who got the inspection done in like a day or two. But it turned out that when the lady applied for whatever she had to apply for, she never asked for a quick inspection. She just simply didn't ask. And if she had asked, she would have had it on her own. She wouldn't have had to get involved with the city council.
The one thing that we had mentioned that's been in the media as well is how to track our permit process online. We created an instruction booklet. How to was emailed to anyone that provided our office with an email address, any applicant, any contractor on November 21st. And then we did some press release as well. And then the Herald Mail and WHAG-TV both did stories on this, trying to get the word out there on how you can track things online. You can't quite apply online yet. We're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. But you can track everything online. So you can see, did I pass my inspection? Where am I in the plan review process? What departments have reviewed my application, which have not? And then you can also see, did my neighbor get that inspection like they were supposed to? You can look any of those types of things up. You do need a username and password to do that, but you create them yourself.
And that had been a goal of ours for a few years, but the Munis software had to be upgraded to allow it to happen.
One of the other things that we've been working on is our how-to brochures for simple permit projects. Pam Harris, one of our building inspectors, she worked very intensely on this. It's in the audience. That Pam worked very hard on this, on different types of simple permit projects that can walk you through the process step by step, providing you with illustrations on how to obtain a permit so that it can be a smoother process for everyone. They're available in our front office and also online.
Typical things a homeowner would want to do himself.
One of the other things that we have been doing is we do meet with our stakeholder groups. We've talked to some of the ones listed there. We talk about the development review process. We talk about vacant and rental licensing requirements and property maintenance standards. So we do meet with groups whenever they want to have someone speak to them. We will talk to them about different types of things that we can listen to, that may be potential changes that we could do, or how to address concerns they may raise. Also, we do a lot of different pre-purchase or pre-design meetings. We also do building walkthroughs, code discussions, progress meetings. And you can see some of the ones that are listed that we've just been doing, honestly, in the last couple of months. That, we'll meet with different reps to talk about how to understand the different standards that you might have to meet for code requirements, and also what may apply to your property and what may not. We also work up different alternative solutions for the architects, and then we also attend construction progress meetings so we can open up any communication lines between us and the contractors, so we can make sure that we can complete the project together at a fast pace.
And oftentimes at those meetings, we don't even really need to be there. It's the owner and their tradespeople that need to be communicating, and so these meetings provide a forum for communication that you would think should be happening anyway.
One of the things that we also did recently was we did informative door hangers about code requirements. Some of them are listed there. They are double-sided. The one side is English and the reverse side is Spanish. We had Leslie down in customer service did all that translations for us, which is being a useful tool so we can clearly communicate to a lot of our citizens on what type of requirements they may have, such as the one shown here, shoveling your sidewalk when it snows, if it ever does snow this year, and then also any type of trash. Well, the kids might want it, so.
And it's a friendlier first introduction to folks about if they've got a code violation, one of these types of yard violations. Instead of getting a notice first off, they can get this first, because, they might not know. Certainly folks who have a history with us would know, but sometimes people don't know. They're new, or it's the first time something's happened, so they would get one of these door hangers rather than an official notice.
One of the other ways that we're trying to improve things is we actually created a permit application and instructions for building permits. We've never had an application in recent years. People just show up with plans, and that can cause a lot of frustrations on the plan reviewers' parts, but also on the permit applicants as well, because they're not providing us with everything that we need. So there might be letters going back and forth on we need this or we need that, and it delays the time in the process. So we created a permit application process. Pam again as well, along with Mary in our office, worked on this. Mary and I, we visited the Frederick County's office a few years ago to see what they did, and basically implemented a very similar process that they have there that many people seem to encourage and like that process. This is they're fillable forms. People can fill them out ahead of time, print them off, and bring them into our office to make application. And then the one major thing that we are changing on this is that we wanted to get the primary contact for these projects. One of the concerns that are always raised is that people don't always know what some of the requirements may be that didn't meet code during the plan review process. So it's to email those deficiencies to the primary contractor for them to disperse that out to all of the contractors and also electrical, plumbing, and mechanical contractors as well, to get them that information.
It seems to be the source of much of the frustration in the field for an inspection when people say, well, I didn't know that I had to do this. Why are you telling me I have to do this now? Well, it was on the comments. Unfortunately, the comments didn't get to them.
And one of the other changes that we've been working on a lot lately is our website. Working with Aaron and Eric, we were able to find out where a lot of the clicks were occurring on our pages, so we could more cater our website to what people that are visiting our website are actually looking for, so we can get things more readily available in their hands and get quicker clicks to get the information that they want to achieve by getting on our website. So we're able to get that, what type of information are downloading, and all sorts of interesting statistics from that website. So lastly, I have some of the things that we're currently working on that will come. I'll mention some things. Kathy's going to follow up with some of the other stuff. We're working on getting ready for rental inspections, identifying the most frequent violations that we have during a rental inspection, and then having pictures of them to show, this is what is compliant, this is what is not code compliant. Also, we're doing
And that was requested. We had a meeting with a Main Street group, and one of the people present was a very large property management company, and they said this would be really helpful to get us so that we can be ready for our inspections. So if you could give us this kind of information. And so this is something we're working on, hope to roll out by the end of this month.
Well, that would be next item, maybe next month. That one's a little bit harder because we're trying to get the pictures involved with it, so it's kind of hard to obtain. But the one that Kathy's mentioned is that we hope to roll out here shortly is the property maintenance code inspection checklist. It's a more detailed checklist. When you develop things and you're in that office, you think that a checklist that you just export basically out of the computer system is detailed for you, but it doesn't always meet the needs of what a customer is. So we're coming up with a more detailed checklist to address, a lot of times to address concerns of consistency, because sometimes you have just a general vague code that may say doors, but there's a lot of different things associated with the door that has to be addressed. So it's kind of getting some of those more detail specifics, and that's something that will be released very, very shortly. Like I mentioned earlier about the online trade and fence permits, we're getting very close to getting that resolved, and we're doing a lot of field testing with that before we want to roll that out. And again, we'll hopefully have the media pick that up as well about you can apply online. We're working on our plan review comments communication, like Kathy had mentioned just a little bit ago, that sometimes we feel that is the breakdown in communication with some of our contractors and inspections when the comments are not being read, and then we're going out in the field and people are failing their inspection because they did not read the comments. So we're coming up with some different ways. That one is by having that designated contact, and then also emailing these comments to the primary contact to get the information quicker in their hands. The other item that we're looking at doing in the next 12 months is updating the property maintenance code. It hasn't been updated since 2008. We've had meetings with property owners and property managers and contractors to work on a product together. And then one of the last items that we're looking into is what to expect when renovating an old building. Looking at doing a booklet on how to navigate these types of projects. Since we are in a very historic town, we have a lot of old buildings. We're looking at doing a booklet that we can help people and what hurdles they may have to overcome when renovating an old building.
I work with the fire marshal's office on that one.
And that's it for our presentation as far as PowerPoint stuff. Kathy had a couple points
Yeah,
she's
just
adding
for
on.
next steps, continue these projects that we have listed here for the activities for the next 12 months, but actually, many of them we're anticipating being done either this month or in the first quarter of 17. Another thing that we're doing is we're gonna do some communication customer service training. The HR department has got, through Skillsoft, got a program for our department. We're actually gonna be a guinea pig for the entire city. It's 6 classes in a sort of a customer relationship building kind of training that you can do on your computer as time permits during your schedule. And we anticipate it might take between 3 to 6 months for those 6 courses. But we'll roll out one course at a time. HR will do an introductory session with the staff about which is what we expect the outcomes will be from this training. They'll do their training, give them a couple of weeks or whatever, how long we think it'll take, and then get back together again with HR to see how we thought that went, and just to be aware of what we're trying to achieve and hope to see modifications in our customer service interactions with the public. And so she made the first one available to us Friday. Paul's already reviewed it because he's always lickety-split. Blaine and I are also going to review it before we roll it out to the staff. And Paul's already had some communications with HR on his impressions of the first class that he did. And then keeping the lines of communication open with our stakeholders. That's another important thing. We already met with the Penmar Board of Realtors and got quite a bit of input. We met with the Main Street folks a couple of times. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be going to the Main Street's Business Relations Work Group, talk a little bit more about this kind of stuff, hear more about what they're thinking. And then I think it'd be really good to have follow-up with the Penmar folks periodically. The Penmar group also involves a lot of folks who manage residential properties, so we're hitting kind of 2 things there, realtors and the landlord chain in that regard, so that'd be helpful. And then if there's any, discuss this possibility of a focus group being formed on code administration issues with stakeholders and community, be involved with that if that happens. And so these are just, wanted to give you an update on things that we've been working on based on input we've been receiving from the public, as well as our own observations of ways to improve our processes and interactions with the public.
And Kathy mentioned that it was something I just arranged recently, that I'm talking to the Landlord Association in April. So we try to communicate and reach out to people as much as possible.
Who is the president of the association?
Alan Johnson,
And he's been the president for how long?
since I've been with the city.
How long have you been with the city?
Almost 15 years.
There's a problem with organizations that have no turnover in their officers, and that organization is a problem, I will say for myself.
And I'll agree. I have some questions, Mayor.
Well,
Could I-
wait a minute, could back up, what'd you say? Lou, what was?
That organization is a problem.
Well, there's been no turnover in the.
Well, that's part of the reason. I mean, when you have the same president for over 15 years, and that's 15 years, and for all I know, he's the same president that's been in existence since it's been established.
Pretty sure he was president back in '97.
I am too. I think it's, and it's proved to be an organization that is more interested in fighting with us than working with us.
Blaine, you didn't say a whole lot.
And I didn't say the same about Penmar, by the way. I want to make that clear.
It's okay if I?
Anybody else? Yeah.
Paul, first, I want to thank you for what you and particularly your field staff do. I know you have one of the most god-awful jobs on earth sometimes. But I would like to ask you about this. If you go from May Street into Bellevue Avenue, right at the end of May Street, that's a dead end, right at the end of May Street is one of the most god-awful properties in the whole city. It is so very bad. I'll mention another, 36 Bellevue. It's really in bad shape. While it's lived in, it's pretty disgusting. There's a ton of grass growing, if it hasn't been killed by the weather, between the curb and the street. There were a couple up in the West End that a man came to me just last Friday about. One house, it's occupied, but at the front door of the house, there's a tree that's a huge tree with a huge trunk. You can't even see the house when the tree is blooming, has leaves on it. Now, these are mostly personal issues with people at their own houses. And I'm under the impression, from what I've been told, that at one point the city intervened in issues like this. But based on some of the contacts that I've had recently with your department, apparently that's not true anymore. Am I right, or do you not go after homeowners who have situations at their houses that could be dangerous to the community or something? What's going on there? Was there a change in policy?
You mean overgrown shrubbery, that kind of thing?
Overgrown shrubbery, that's one of the things. Overgrown, well, I know you go after overgrown grass, but that sort of thing, yes.
The property maintenance code applies to any property in the city of Hagerstown, so it applies to owner-occupied, rental, commercial, industrial, churches, anything along those lines. And it's only what it's actually in the code. So if it's something along the lines of shrubbery, there's nothing in the code that tells anyone has to trim a shrub that's on their property unless it's blocking the public right-of-way or blocking the view of someone entering an alley or a street type of a thing.
We tell people to trim the trees back all the time.
We tell people to trim their trees over streets and alleys,
Right.
trimming them out of alleys. There is if it's a vacant property and there's a tree that is obstructing the view of the doors at the property through the SEPTED standards, there to trim those back as well. If there's not a standard for an occupied property, but there is one for a vacant. As far as the other ones mentioned earlier, I don't have specifics on those, so I can't really address those. But anyone that is there, the one situation we have 7 full-time inspection staff in the field for property maintenance issues, and there's over 14,000 properties in the city. So at times there might be another one going on.
Okay, and I'll end my comments by saying this. There was a property in the west end of Hagerstown. It was one of the worst trash heaps in the whole city. Not too far from Cafe del Sol. I think you know where I'm talking about. And through the diligent work of your department, but in particular through the diligent work of Pam Harris, that piece of useless property, garbage pit it was. I mean, it was disgusting. It should have been down years ago, but thanks to Pam primarily, it is now gone. And I've had several calls from the neighborhood. People in the neighborhood are very grateful for the fact that it's now gone. And quite frankly, the fact that it's now gone, it really does improve the entrance to the whole area up there. So thank Pam for that, and thank your staff for that. What's the other restaurant, the one that's closed now, right beside this property?
Wood Point.
Wood Point Park.
Wood Point, it's closed now, yeah. Immediately to the right of Wood Point, if you're facing Wood Point, that property is now down and it's gone, and it's improved Hagerstown greatly by being down. So thank you all.
Anybody else have any comments?
I do. I would just like to say thank you for coming out here and explaining this. Being new here, obviously, I understand you have a very tough job. We hear a lot of complaints. I've tried to voice them and hear the other side of the story, so I appreciate that greatly. I think a lot of this was very positive information that should be shared publicly, because you guys take a lot of heat, and maybe some of it is unnecessary. Obviously, a lot of it is unnecessarily, because there are statistics up there. With that said, there's still a very common theme that we're hard to deal with. And so I would like to make it all of our mission to figure out why. And I know we had a meeting about this, and we're kind of beating a dead horse over it, but the more focus groups we can do or whatever to help resolve that perception, because those numbers don't speak problems. You know, that the statistics that you just showed that you guys are doing your job and doing it very well, and that things are being handled properly, but the perception is not that. So it would be nice, I think, obviously for all of us, to try to figure out why that perception is still there. How do we fix it? Is it a marketing thing? Is it a customer service thing? Is it just, like, what is it? You know, so.
It's interesting, Emily, because you hear the statistic that 93% were satisfied, which sounds great, but I gotta tell you, 7 to 10% of the people responding alone can cause the perception that you're talking about. So you can have 93% of the people saying you're doing a great job, and 7%, and those 93% aren't out there beating the bushes saying, I want you to know what a great job the city's doing.
Right, or
And I'm not saying there
humans to
weren't
do that.
legitimate issues,
Yeah.
but I gotta tell you, I wish those folks would come in and speak to us. Obviously, they've spoken to you and hopefully Paul, but, as I said, there's one association that I don't have a lot of listening to, so.
Well, I think that, to maybe try to put Lou's comments a bit more diplomatically and answer your question at the same time, a good bit of the negative response that is the most vocal that you receive, at least for me, are often from the same folks who have been doing business in the city, managing such properties for decades. In other words, it's interesting that in any number of cases, and in a majority of the cases, as the numbers represent, I mean, you're talking 3,000 inspections, you know, you're talking dozens of new investments, that in that process, and especially from individuals new to the process, are the individuals that you hear the least from, and the individuals that you hear the most negative response from, almost in terms of the throw their hands up and leave, are the folks that have been around the longest doing it. So there is no actual process of throwing hands up and leaving, but there is process of continued complaint. And, you know, for me, when we had a little communication, you know, on this effort, you know, the numbers are what they are. You can't change them. Staff's presented them. But, you know, if I were to sort of break this down into a couple of areas, I think that as much as we've identified efforts to reach out even further, I'd like to know if there's, in this process, an effort for those complaints to be absorbed and to determine if there's any consistency. And I don't mean the ones like the two neighbors that complain about each other's tree incessantly or complain about each other's retaining wall, incessantly. I mean, if you were to see a pattern develop of a broad spectrum of folks within any part of this process saying the same thing. And I use this example, and I'm sure other folks at the table have heard it, that if an inspector goes out and a different inspector goes out, then they may receive a different set of parameters in which to meet on that second sort of return visit. And I guess for me, if I were to break it down into a couple of areas, I would say, first, can we define if there are any consistent, specific complaints? And second, what area do they fall? And for me, there's three areas. They're either a customer service issue, they are a code issue, or they are a process issue. And that's where, if it were me, I would try and focus, if you're talking about a focus group, that I would focus that effort on to say, okay, here are the three criteria they fall, and they're either a code issue, and then you make a determination, whether the code needs change or not. I haven't really seen any code that I would change. I think Donna said the same thing. Or they're a process issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's
the code. And if it's a process issue, you say, okay, can we make sure that of these 7 inspectors, of the 4, building inspectors, or whatever the number is, that there is consistency in that, if there's a process issue. And then on the customer service side, I think the same thing. That's, I think, as simple as I would approach it.
The survey that you sent out and you got back, what was your response number-wise on, you sent out so many and you got back?
We got back 15%, which is a typical return for any type of survey.
15%, 93% of the people, those 15% thought that you.
Now, that was the contractor survey though, correct?
Correct. It was licensed
I believe
contractors,
the-
electricians, and
The
plumbers.
business and property owner survey was the exact opposite.
We did not have done one of those.
Main Street did
Main
one.
Street did a bit, well, that slide you just showed was from the Main Street survey, correct?
No, it was from the one that we did.
Okay, my apology there.
Yeah, the Main Street survey, there were some very strong criticisms, but then when you looked at the data, there was big groups of people that were in the satisfied range. But there were certainly some very strong criticisms in there as well. But we assume it's a lot of things working together. It's not one specific thing.
Oh, it's
It's just
not, no.
Why we're gonna do the customer service training.
Speaking of
why-
that,
yeah.
but I asked the city administrator, I'll ask you, I'd like to see what that entails, if I can get included in those emails about what the training class is,
You wanna get a password so you can take the training?
That'd be fantastic, yeah.
Be a good step.
Yeah, okay.
And you can always use a little bit more training in customer service, right? I mean,
Problem
come on.
started at the top.
Kristen wants to take 2 classes. Kristen wants to take 2 classes, but, yeah, so, I mean, I'd be interested to see what all it entails.
Sure. And we also, because we've talked about this, we think there's a process issue too, in that for whatever reason, the comments are not getting where they need to get. And so that's why people are frustrated at corrections in the field. It's not that they don't know the code or there's a code problem. It's that when we reviewed the plans that were submitted, there were like 6, 7, 12, whatever comments, and they're not getting to the man who's doing the work in the field.
Right,
And so we've
right.
got to figure out a way.
So when you come in and do
Yeah.
your inspection and these things are wrong, then they
It
get
was
frustrated
sub to
because
a
they gotta
sub
tear it
to a
out and do it
sub.
all over
Yeah.
again.
And that third sub isn't getting his piece of the
He's
pie.
using his bid documents, he's not using the approved plan. So that's another whole issue. We did things in the past to be friendlier to the tradesmen, which may have created this monster, I think, where they're not getting we're allowing trades permits to be issued before the building permit at the request of the tradesman. But that creates even more of a distance that the comments have to try to get from the building permit process over to this guy who got his electrical permit 3 months ago, and there's that disconnect. So I think there's process issues that we're trying to figure out how to fix.
Gotcha.
I think Chris has a good point as far as, trying to pinpoint and define that issue. The focus groups are a great idea. The problem sometimes with focus groups is after the fact. You're finding this information after the fact. when you talk about customer service, and the big thing in customer service, this day and age, everyone gets a survey, a real-time survey. Whether we can incorporate something in that process as far as once said entity goes through this process, they receive a survey at that point of completion of their job, and encourage them to fill it out with, I don't know, give them a reduction back of a couple of hours off their permit fee or something. So that way you get some real-time information and feedback as far as that process that they just went through. You know, you could take it a step further and, you know, as in the private sector does a lot with the customer service surveys, they, you know, go into job performance and things like that. But I think just to gather that information would be a good way to start. You know, we've had some discussions here previously about standards, and there's no dispute here on my end of not having standards or a reduction in standards or a reduction in code or anything of that nature. My whole question has always been the consistent application of standards across the board. Specifically, whether it's inside the city of Hagerstown or in Washington County, that there's no double standard per se. And again, Councilwoman Keller's correct, as you hear that, you know, perception, and as Mr. Messner said, that it could be, you know, the few that are making the most noise. But if we're not consistently applying the standards, not only through our own process, but also throughout, outside of our city limits, so we're not doing the same thing inside or out, we're getting in our own way. You know, I would hope that when we implement codes and standards, we're doing them on the same time frame as the county or the state. I would hope that we're not doing them, you know, if a new code comes out and you have 6 months to enact it, that the county's not enacting it, you know, for month 6 and we're enacting it 6/1 or month 1. You know, the rental licensing, that's obviously a totally separate animal because obviously the county doesn't have that. But, you know, specifically when it comes to permits and inspections of development and redevelopment, we need to have the most equal standards across the board, whether you're in the city of Hagerstown or you're not in the city of Hagerstown. You know, alternatively, it would be, you know, looking at a way to either model what they're doing in the county. I don't know specifically what may or may not be different that causes that perception. Or alternatively, looking to streamline the process within the county and the city. So whether you do a development in the city of Hagerstown or if you do a development outside of the city of Hagerstown, you're going through the same process. So the comments about Penmar and the Landlord Association, I understand that maybe you're feeling.
No, Penmar, I feel very positive about.
Okay.
No, I want to make it clear, no, and I'll talk to you offline about my concerns about the other. Penmar, I have nothing but very positive things to say about Penmar. I don't want there to be any negative thoughts that I have about it.
Even the landlords, and again, I'm new to this, so I understand I may be naive and not have the history. But just the comment I know that Mr. Johnson said has been there for a long time, and you second that, these are from two of our most longstanding public servants in this room. So I don't know. Kind of find that, like,
Anybody else? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
We're going to move on to the city administrator's comments.
Nothing additional.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Ms. Keller.
I have comments, sorry, I know you want to leave.
Nope, I'm here until we're done.
Just, I think we need to look into something about dual highway. 2 people have been killed there by vehicles recently. There's been a lot of chatter. I don't know how to resolve it. I don't even know what the issue is. I'm just putting it out there. Clearly, there's a problem. People are requesting more lighting, a crosswalk, a something, so I know we
I
have.
still think we ought to give a class on how to cross the street.
well, that, I mean, you're supposed to walk there.
And state highway,
I'm sorry.
state highway.
All right, well,
And they've already done a study once so
Yeah.
far in within the last year and a half. There's a full study and recommendations, but it's all state highway.
so what, can we recommend to them? I mean, but they're dying in Hagerstown though, and it's making us look really
But
bad.
what's the
so-
recommendation, though? And, see, that's part of the problem. You know, I don't know. I mean, I was raised in a time when my parents taught me that a 4,000-pound vehicle weighed more than I did, okay? And that I needed to look both ways before I crossed the street. And if it was dark, especially if it was dark, there would be headlights coming. I mean,
Right.
there's, you
But
know,
this has been a consistent thing. I
But-
mean,
but,
it's
okay, so-
consistently happening.
again, I mean, you know, the answer isn't to spend millions upon millions of dollars on lighting and sidewalks and things like that in an area that is a highway area. I mean, you know, cross it, you know, there are intersections the whole way down to a highway, the whole way.
One
Cross
of
at
the
the intersection.
recommendations was fencing like they did in Frederick on the
That's
Golden
the
Mile
only
and
solution.
things like that.
That's the only solution
Yeah.
that's gonna stop it, is you fence the
entire
median
median.
area.
Right,
That's
which is,
it.
if you go down the Golden Mile in Frederick, that's what they did there, for the same reason.
I mean, you
Talking
know,
about a
it just,
fortune.
cross at the intersections. I mean, that's why there's stoplights, that's why there's blinking lights that
I
say.
think we gave Councilwoman Keller her time to comment, maybe back.
No,
I'm
no,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
I understand that.
I get
across the
frustrated about it,
crosswalks
too.
as well, but when people are dying on a consistent basis, you can't just turn a blind
Emily, I
eye to
think
it
the
either.
answer is that they did a study very recently, within the last 18 months, and we can get that to you so you can see what they did recommend. Because that was done.
Thank you.
Because of this.
I don't, and the next issue, I live in Hager's Crossing. Our neighborhood is very loud right now about we need school zone crossings. I don't know if this is a school board issue, but we are now a school zone because of Jonathan Hager, and there are no signs, and people drive like maniacs back there. So they have asked repeatedly in our neighborhoods groups and everything. So I'm not sure if we need to reach out to the school board for that, but there are no signs or no blinking lights like most school zones have now.
Cameras.
Or cameras, or anything that, speed bumps.
We are looking at the idea of the speed camera for that area. That'll be coming
Sounds
forward
great.
to you very soon.
Okay.
And
Or-
traffic and parking would be the appropriate organization to bring that to, as far as the signage
Yeah,
to Rodney.
because when you're coming up either way, you
Mhm.
don't, unless you live there, no, but there are people that
Yeah,
just
but bare
drive,
minimum,
you
we should
know.
have some signs and
Right.
crosswalks for
No,
sure.
yeah, we should take care of that.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
just that.
Cool.
Also, I got an email from a local group of astronomers who would like to talk to us about lighting. Is that the right word, astronomers? Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna forward it to everyone because they have an interesting presentation they would like to present to us, so I'm just putting it out there. They have some pretty cool ideas about when we do lighting, how to minimize so that we can preserve our sky view. All right, and the last thing I'd like to talk about is the murders that have been happening too in the last couple days. I know it's been heavily reported on, and just my opinion, a lot of this is drug-related, and we can't continue, and this is, I understand it's not necessarily a city issue, but all of us, city, county, all of us as leaders, business leaders, elected officials cannot continue to turn a blind eye to this drug issue. It is very, very serious, and now we're experiencing the byproduct of what a drug crisis does. We're getting people who are murdering each other over overdoses, and petty crimes, and theft is up in our areas, and this is not a problem that's gonna go away anytime soon, and I think we need to put some serious thought into how we're gonna start resolving it. Our police do an excellent job, but this is not a policing issue. This is a public health issue that is stemming out of control. We're now seeing the unfortunate byproducts of it. So I'm going to continue to keep talking about it, and I'm doing my due diligence in the background to collect data so I can present something formally, but it's very serious now. I know we all know that, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is stemming directly from an opioid crisis that's being left untreated. And it's alarming, and we need to put a stop to it because it's crippling our town.
Yeah.
That's what
I
I have to
agree.
say about that. That's
That it? Mr. Upshur?
Two things. The first is, I agree with you that it's an issue. It is not going to decrease or decline. You know, it's interesting, you know, the other day when the article of the first incident, you know, was reported in the paper, there's 4 other articles in the paper, and one was a homicide in Martinsburg. The other was a home invasion in Great Cove, which is in the McConnellsburg, middle of nowhere. Same reason. And the other was an incident in Frederick. And, you know, the more I think that you design
a community around the availability of the services and housing and dynamics for that to occur, it's going to proliferate. And it doesn't matter whether it's here, or in the middle of nowhere in Great Cove, or a place like Great Cove. A friend of mine says often, when folks say it's bad in Hagerstown, it's not bad in Hagerstown, it's bad everywhere, and it's for these very reasons. The second is, I don't want to say along similar lines, but, about 2 weeks before this administration took office, I'm getting to the presentation that was made tonight on Nolan Village West. There was a letter submitted by the former mayor in support of the project. So, I sent a letter to the contrary that the mayor and council as a body hadn't weighed in on the issue. And I know Lou asked the question tonight, and I had failed to follow up. But I would only say this, that the response we received from the applicant, the folks involved in doing that, is that they don't need anything from the city. I would hope what that means is exactly that. Then we're not going to send anything. I have no idea why that letter was sent prior to this administration taking office. But if it's not needed, it's not part of the process. And frankly, if the folks that are most offended by such a development in that area happen to be outside of the city, they're certainly welcome to go to the Board of County Commissioners and get a letter of opposition. But I don't believe that we should do anything more than what that applicant stated as fact, that they do not need such a letter from this city.
They needed the letter last time because it's federal.
Mr. Corbett?
The development that was talked this evening with the McCleary and the issues you guys just brought up, I believe, and I agree with Chris that there is some not coincidence, but they go together somewhat. I mean, we continue to enable a situation where we encourage such developments, not only this one we heard this evening, but I think you all are aware of my vocal opposition to the expansion at Court Park, the Cortland Manor Apartments. The reason I ran for city council was to hopefully make a difference, and the unfortunate reality is I hear with that project, and I heard tonight with the project here, it doesn't really matter what we say as a council. And I find that very disheartening. As I said before, that's been mentioned here, that at the end of the day, we need to look at what's good for Hagerstown. And is this good for the city of Hagerstown? And whether it's the Court Park Apartments or the McCleary home, we can't possibly, well, there's going to be a disagreement, so I can't say we possibly be all in agreement that it's not good for the city of Hagerstown. But again, we are continuing to enable a situation where we're going to continue to attract the types of individuals who then partake in the violent situations that occurred over the weekend. Chief Brito left. I wanted to commend Chief Brito and his staff, Hagerstown Police Department, for a job well done. He talks of his department being stout. I don't think there was any more evidence needed that. They solved that first murder within 11 hours, which is phenomenal, and wrapped the other case up the same night. I would call on our local judicial members, whether it be the state's attorney's office and the county judges, that they give these cases and cases that matter the same attention and focus. There was a judge when I grew up in this town, they used to call him the hanging judge. Some people loved him, some people loathed him or didn't like him, but there was a lot of people who feared him. And we need to bring back accountability to this city, because these type of acts cannot be condoned And we cannot have them in our city, and we can't continue to enable a situation where we're gonna perpetuate this type of situation. So, pretty much all I had to say on it. Thank you.
And I would respond, Paul, in this way. With all due respect, one of the problems we have is what you just said. You said two things. One, we don't have any legal control over it, and at the same time, you say we are enabling it. We are not enabling it. And that's one of the problems that government has, is that people assume we are. Just like when you emailed and said, who are the idiots who allowed Cortland Manor to be there? Well, the people that did that was a government in the county that, you have zoning. And if you have zoning that allows for apartment complexes, then apartment complexes get built there. And you don't have the ability to go in and tell a developer who is presenting a plan that fits within the zoning requirements and the planning requirements that you don't like them and you're not going to let them build there. Not all apartment complexes are like Cortland. I lived out at Haven Road for a while. It was fine out there. Many of our apartment complexes are fine. And we do not enable that. Matter of fact, the only time the city had the opportunity to do something about Cortland was the planning commission who said no. And it's the very courts that you're talking about, if you want to talk about enabling, that told us yes. Every time we have attempted to do things like that, the courts are the ones who say you can't do it. And let us keep in mind, if there was a federal law that allowed governments to not allow Section 8 housing, what local government do any of us around the table think would allow it? So we are not enabling anybody, okay? And you correctly point out the state's attorney is run by the county and the judges are run by the county. So what the state's attorney's office does and the judiciary does is not enabling either. Matter of fact, the Day Reporting Center is the best thing that's happened in this community in a long time. I understand your frustrations. You are learning what we have all learned up here for a long time, and that is things that you want to do because it makes sense for your community and seems very logical, the law doesn't allow. And that's wherein the problem lies. And listen, I don't think the law should allow us to tell people that you can't live certain places of your Section 8 housing. And I don't think the law should allow us to tell people that we're not going to allow public housing and low-cost housing. If you think you got crime problems now and you got drug problems now, just start telling these people they have nowhere to live. Because candidly, if you want to look at where most of the homicides and death occur, where are they? They're in the homeless camps. That's where they occur, but nobody complains about them, okay? Because that's just taking care of things. And my last comment will be about social media and perception. People go to Frederick, and they want to put on social media, why can't Hagerstown be like Frederick? Well, of course, Frederick has a hell of a lot more homeless and murders than we do, but when there's shootings, oh, it's little Baltimore. It's not little Frederick. Cumberland had 10 times the heroin problem that this city had before we even had heroin. But everybody wants to equate us to Baltimore when it comes to bad things. They don't want to say, well, you are like Frederick. You are like these other communities. And the drug problem is a national problem. And I'll be quite frank with you, from one who's in the business, there finally became an understanding that jail is not the answer to the drug problem, but the treatment is, and intervention is. We have more psychologists working in our prison systems than we do in mental hospitals. We have a situation where we no longer have psychiatrists who do anything but prescribe drugs because there is no way, with the amount of psychiatrists in this country, that they can give therapy, so that's delegated to psychologists. And And until we get to those root causes, there will not be a solution. You know, Nancy Reagan wasn't right when she said, just say no. And quite candidly, some judges weren't right who said, just lock them up. And I think that this judiciary and this state's attorney's office is taking the same look that we're all looking at is what can we do? Friday, I will be meeting with the Washington County Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee again, which has the Health Department, Parole and Probation, the state's attorney's office, the judges, the public defender's office. And 90% of what those meetings are about is addressing the drug issue. It took years to get a juvenile drug court. It is taking even more years to get an adult drug court. The judiciary is trying to get it done, and funding is the problem. In Washington County, in the state of Maryland, mental health is generally looked at to be taken care of financially by the counties. Unfortunately, I think our county rates probably last in financial expenditures for these things. So it's a complex, difficult issue, and candidly, none of us have figured out the solution yet, because if we had, we wouldn't have been dealing with this now. As I said, to go back to the Reagan years with the war on drugs, it's difficult, and there's no simple answer.
Mr. Munson.
I'll be brief, Mayor. I was thinking recently about last year. And in many respects, it was a difficult year for the citizens of Hagerstown. We had one of the biggest snowfalls we have had in a long time. But the thought occurred to me, when you look back at that the city employees, the people that we employ and we pay, stepped up and did a wonderful job on behalf of all the citizens of the city of Hagerstown. The police, the fire, and all the others, including the snow removal people, in spite of all the complaints we got. And I just wanted to say thank you to all those city employees who, in spite of difficulties, stepped up and did their jobs in a wonderful way last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. I'm going to close this out by saying that I too want to thank our police department for their excellent and quick solving of these two incidents that happened since Friday. You know, it's bad enough when we are dealing with an epidemic that's out of control, and not having a facility in which to treat these people, which I know you're working on very hard, Emily, and you're getting some good headway there, and I applaud that effort, and I think we'll see it come to fruition. But, you know, I met today at breakfast with Chief Brito and Captain Langston, and we talked about some initiatives that we're going to put forward. You know, we have to control our streets. That's the bottom line. I mean, our people everybody needs to feel safe on our streets. Everybody. And we need to control our streets. I believe that what you'll see coming out here very soon will be ways that we can help answer that question and gain some, whether it's perception or reality, allow people to see that we're moving forward in a direction that makes everybody safe and makes everybody secure. So, having said that, I look forward to implementing some of these new initiatives and, you know, giving our people some peaceful nights. So, thank you all for tonight, and we're done. Thank you.